Shalom, Havarim. Welcome to Thursday Bible Study. Today we're going to be looking at Genesis 34 and 35, so let's open in prayer. Father God, we just thank you for another blessed day. We thank you, Lord, for your word, and we just ask you to open it up for us, reveal your word to us, Lord, that we can share it with others. We thank you in Jesus' name. I'm going to start today with Jonathan Cahn's Book of Mysteries, and we're going to go to page 2. The I am of all I ams. And I will start reading here. It was the second day that I realized there would be no set time for the teacher's coming. He came in the afternoon. Do you know the name of God? Asked the teacher. I don't know that I do. It's made up of 4 Hebrew letters, the Yud, the He, the Vav, and the Heh. W-H-V-H. And it's the most sacred of names. So sacred, some refuse to say it, and yet you say it all the time. The sacred name of God, I replied. How could I when I never knew it? When you speak of yourself, you say the name. I don't understand. Well, when you feel happy, you say, I am happy. And when you're not, you say, I am sad. And when you tell others who you are, you say, I am, followed by your name. YHVH means I am, the name of the eternal name of God. His name is I am. And then we all say his name. Yes, you've always said it. It's woven into the fabric of his existence. When you speak of yourself, you must say his name. And why is that? Because your existence comes from his existence. He is the I am of all existence, the I am of all I ams. Your I am only exists because of his I am. As you exist from him, it is only from him that you can find the reason and purpose of your existence. Therefore, when you say your name, you must always speak his name, and you must always speak his name first, because his existence is first, and your existence flows forth from his. That's the flow of existence. Therefore, you must put him first, and then let everything flow from that. Let everything begin with him and flow forth from him. That's the secret of life. Not only live for him, but to live your life from him, to live from his living, to move from his moving, to act from his actions, and to feel from his heart. To be from his being and to become who you are from who he is, I am. And today, learn the secret of living each moment from his life, doing from his doing, loving from his love, and being from his being. You know, that's the only way we can love other people that are unlovable, is allowing God to love through us. Otherwise, it just can't be done. But I want to tell you a little bit more about this I am. In my little study of Hebrew, the Hebrew language, they do not say, I am thirsty or I am cold. They don't use I am personally. They save that for God. God is the only one that is I am in their language. They will say, I thirst. The reason they do that is because they have this reverence for God. And that is the reason when Jesus said, I am, they wanted to stone him, because he was saying, I am God in their minds. So just a little bit of extra there for that page. A little bit of review. We saw last week Jacob had been blessed working for Laban. God blessed him despite the fact that Laban was a cheater. And he had a livestock, he had servants, he had children. He was very, very rich. And Rachel finally was able to bear a son for him, Joseph. And he now had 11 sons and 1 daughter that is mentioned. He had other daughters, but we don't know about them because they weren't important to the story. And so this was the time that God said, it's time to go home. He had his son. He had been blessed. God had seen in the 6 years that he'd gathered up enough wealth that he could leave. And so he checked with his wives, and the wives realized their father was a cheater and really didn't care about them personally, and they were ready to go with him. And so we read that he packed it up while Laban was sheep shearing and wouldn't know they were going, and they took off, and they had He traveled pretty fast, as fast as he could with everybody for 3 days until he got to a mountain and stopped there to rest. And of course, when Laban found out, he took off with these men. He was going to get back everything he could. And so that's what we saw there. And of course, Laban didn't really want to face him, but he knew that he had to face Laban if they caught up with him, and he was able to deal with that. Laban was really mostly interested in those teraphim that had been taken. He knew they were there, but he couldn't prove it. He couldn't find them because Rachel had hidden them. And I actually saw this week a drawing of one of the saddles for a camel at that time, and it was kind of like a big chair, and had an area below where you could store things, your little traveling things. And then above, because the weather and the sand was so terrible, it was like a tent over it. And so it was just like a big tent on top of this camel, and then they would be inside. And I know at least the women would ride that way. The men could wrap up their faces and everything, but this big tent protected the child or the woman that was inside. So it's kind of interesting to think about that. Laban went off, but before he went back home, he wanted assurance that Jacob would not come back and take any of his inheritance or take anything that he had. And so that was the commitment that they made to each other. And then he left and went home, and Jacob went on his way. And then he, of course, was met by the angel of the Lord, and he was prepared then to see his brother. That was the big fear that he had. What would his brother do? And so we know that he was not willing to let go of the man that he wrestled, which we believe is the angel of the Lord. And I was thinking, he was very tenacious. We saw that when he was born. He held on to his brother's heel catcher. And so he evidently was doing the same thing with this angel of the Lord, with this man who was angel of the Lord. And so we see his personality there. He wanted that blessing, and he needed to surrender. That was what the man wanted. He wanted Jacob to surrender to him, just like we need to surrender to God too, And instead of fighting him, we need to surrender, and then he'll give his blessings to us. And so that's really the picture for us personally. So he was blessed, and his name was changed to Israel. Now, another interesting thing about that is that you will see sometimes he's called Jacob still after that. His name was changed. He said, "You'll no longer be Israel," but then we see him called Jacob. Now, why is that? Well, Chuck Missler had a viewpoint on that I heard once, and he said that through the Bible, when God changes your name, you have your old character in your old name, and you have a new character with your new name. But if you revert back to that old character, then you'll see that old name, and that you'll see that in the New Testament with Peter. Sometimes it'll be called Simon again, even though his name is Peter, and that's when he's struggling, and when he's really shining. Why then? He's Peter. So it's kind of that way with Jacob. When Jacob is kind of fallen short a little bit and going back to his old ways, he seems to be called Jacob. But when he's following God like he should, why, he's Israel. So that's something to think about. It seems to be a pattern that works. When he finally finds that Esau is coming with 400 men, he's just scared to death. But he's got a plan. He's always got a plan, and he prays. And of course, that's the first thing everybody should do, is to pray and have God leading you in your plan. He did not think that Esau would have changed his mind. He just wanted protection by God from Esau and what he would do. But God took care of the whole thing. And when we let God do it, he gives us so much more than we really expect. And so he was amazed when Esau had completely forgiven him, and they embraced each other, and they apparently trusted each other and split up after that. The fact that he insisted that Esau take what he offered to him shows in that ancient custom, that shows that he was forgiven. If Esau had not taken him, then it would tell him that Esau was still carrying some grudge. And so it was really important for him that Esau take all that he offered. So we see that. And so then he continued on, and eventually he set up a tent outside of Shechem, and I think we left it there. So we're going to continue from that. I want to go back one little way before we leave Rachel, and the very beginning when Laban, I think I forgot to mention this earlier, and I thought it was kind of interesting. When Laban tricked Jacob and switched the women on the wedding night, there is an actual law, a Jewish law, that is called let's see, what's it called? It's called Laban's youngest daughter, Rachel. That's the name of the law. And it's a term used that they put into a contract so that you can't have any shenanigans or any switching. So that is carried on all these thousands of years, still in there, so that these things can't happen. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting how things that happened, like that, can have an influence over people many, many years later. So let's start with 34, and I'm going to read verse 1. Now, Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom she'd borne to Jacob, went out to see the daughters of the land. Okay, and this is interesting just in itself, so let's just think about, here she was. It is figured that she was very young, and of course they did marry young in those days. She might have only been 10 years old, she might have been 12 at the most. Very, very young girl. We don't know whether she went by herself, it doesn't tell us any of those things. She was curious about the pagan city that they were living near. It was drawing her to it. And it makes me wonder, did her mom know that she was going? Did she have the okay, or did she just decide to go on her own? Kids that age, sometimes they just take off and decide to do these things, not really realizing the dangers. We don't know what happened there. However, we do know that Shechem saw her and he seized her, and that pretty much means that he took her without her wanting him to. He took her and he kept her, and in our day we call it rape, and he kept her in his home. And so when Jacob, well, I'm going to continue reading instead of just telling you. Let's see here, 2 to 4 here. And when Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite, prince of the country, saw her, he took her and lay with her, and he violated her, or he defiled her. In the Hebrew it says he defiled her. His soul was strongly attracted to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob, and he loved the young woman and spoke kindly to the young woman. So Shechem spoke to his father Hamor, saying, "Get me this young woman as a wife." There's a little controversy over this, whether she was willing. When you look at the ancient Hebrew Jewish texts and all, there are viewpoints on both sides. Some blame her and some blame him. So we really don't know for sure. Looking at the wording, my viewpoint is that she didn't have a choice. She was taken. I could be wrong, but that's just my viewpoint.
What's her age?
Well, she was probably not more than 12, but they married.
Well, that's a given right there.
But they married very young in those days,
Consent's consent.
So we don't know for sure, but that's a pretty good viewpoint. Let me look at my notes here a little bit. See, now I want to go back just a little bit about the background of Dinah. Leah had 4 boys right in a row, and then she didn't have any children for a while, and at that time, Rachel was very jealous, and so she gave her maidservant to Jacob, and her maidservant had 2 sons. And then Leah was able to have more children, and she had 2 more boys, so she had 6 boys altogether, and then she had Dinah. So that's where she comes in. So she's kind of, she would be the 9th, I would believe, of the kids that we are told about, at least. So that's where she comes in the line. Let's see here. Let me see a little bit more here. Another little thing is that Joseph is going to be born in the next 2 or 3 years. So you can see that their age is pretty close. She's a little older, but that's kind of the timeline there. So now we find that Shechem has taken Dinah, and he kind of likes her. But I'm not sure if he was really in love with her. The word in Hebrew could be he was kind of in lust with her. He was fascinated by her. But when we go a little further in the chapter, he kind of reveals himself, at least in my view. He sees all that Jacob has, all of the worldly things that he has, and he uses that to encourage all the people, all the men. Later on we'll find out. And he says, if we intermarry, why, those things will be ours. And so I think that was part of it too. He was looking at the material advantage of bringing her in. Remember, he was a pagan and worldly man, and so I'm sure he liked her. Maybe he thought he loved her, and he just thought, boy, this will just work out all ways, And in that society, in that ancient society, this was a typical thing. I mean, if they saw somebody they liked and could take them, why, they would. That was just the way it was. And so it wasn't anything unusual. However, that wasn't the way that the Jews were to live and to be. And so I'll just continue on then. Verse 5. Let's see. We're going to read 5 through 12. Jacob heard that he had defiled Dinah, his daughter, and now his sons were with the livestock on the field, so Jacob held his peace until they came. So he did nothing. He was probably thinking about, what he might do. Looking back at Jacob's life, and this is just my own view, studying this, he seems to be very docile. He does not want to rattle anything. I'm talking about Jacob.
Where is he in all this?
He is the father of this girl. And so...
He's consenting to this?
No, he's not consenting, but he's not doing anything right now. He has heard what happened, and he's holding his peace. He's not doing anything until his sons get back. And so this is really all we know about it right now until later on. It doesn't say anything more about Jacob's feelings. We don't know how he felt about Dinah. She, being Leah's daughter, that was the wife that he really did not love. And he stayed mostly with Rachel. And so I'm wondering if he was very much of a father figure to her. And so, and we understand too how when he put the boys, all of the other boys, especially the concubines' children first, and then Leah's boys, and then of course Rachel's boys very last, it's very obvious even to the boys, and they were getting older at the time, they knew what was going on and how they rated with their father. And so boys were so much more important than girls. That she was way down on the totem pole as far as his feelings. So he's not really wanting to do too much. He realizes that the pagans around him have more people, and he's got to be careful, So I'm sure he's thinking all of these things because it comes out a little bit later. And so he does nothing. And so the sons came in from the field when they heard about it, and they were grieved and very angry. because he had done a disgraceful thing in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter. And here their family is called in Israel because even though it's not Israel yet, it's the beginning of Israel. And so the writer, which would be Moses, is calling it Israel because that's what it is when he's living. So her brothers are very upset over this, and especially her full brothers. Now, she had 6 full brothers, but they were stair steps, and so some of them were younger. So they would have all been, I believe, Reuben was probably the oldest, and he may have been in his early 20s, maybe. He was young, but he would be considered a man at the time. And then there was Simeon and Levi, and then who was the last one? Forgot the last one. Judah. So those are the first 4 boys, and they were the oldest, of course, and they would be the ones that would be highly upset over this because they were understanding everything. And so they are there discussing it, and Hamor spoke with them, and he said, it doesn't mention Jacob being here at this time. We don't know if he's there with the sons or whether they're meeting or not. We just don't know. But Hamor spoke with them, and he said, "The soul of my son Shechem longs for your daughter. Please give her to him as his wife, and make marriages with us, and give us your daughters, and take our daughters to yourselves. And then you shall dwell with us, and the land shall be before you. Dwell and trade in it, and acquire possessions for yourselves in it." So he's come to them, and he hasn't apologized because this isn't a big deal with him. This is just something that's done. And he's offering a really good deal to them. Come in, and we'll just all be family, and everything's just going to be rosy. And so, of course, the brothers aren't considering this at all, but they have a little bit of the DNA that Jacob has. They have a little sneakiness in them, yes, and so they counter the offer. And Shechem said to his father and to her brothers, "Let me find favor in your eyes, and whatever you say to me, I will give." So he's given them an open check. I'll pay whatever you want for. Let's just do this deal. Let's just get everybody together. And he said, "Ask me ever so much dowry and gift, and I will give according to what you say to me. But give me the young woman as a wife." But the sons of Jacob answered Shechem and Hamor, his father. Now, the interesting thing about Hamor, his name means donkey or ass. And to us, that's funny, But in that day, they were highly valued animal. And they were respected because they were smart, And they kind of had a mind of their own. And the pagans appreciated that, and so that was a good name for him. So it's funny how different cultures look at things differently. And so the sons of Jacob spoke deceitfully because he had defiled Dinah, their sister. And they said to him, "We can't do this thing. Give our sister to one who's uncircumcised, for that would be a reproach to us. But on this condition we will consent to you. If you will become as we are, if every male of you is circumcised, then we will give your daughters to you, our daughters to you, and we will make your daughters take your daughters to us, and we will dwell with you and will become one people. But if you won't heed us and be circumcised, then we'll take our daughter and be gone." And their words pleased Hamor and Shechem, Hamor's son. So the young man didn't delay to do this thing because he was delighted with Jacob's daughter, and he was more honorable than all the household of his father. Now, the word honorable means a little bit different than we think of. He was more respected in the city, in the pagan world. because he was up and coming, and everybody liked him, and so he was able to persuade them, and that's really more, I believe, what that word means, that he had a way of persuading them, and getting them to do what they wanted. So Hamor and Shechem, his son, came to the gate of the city, and remember, that's always where business is done. Whenever they have to announce anything, that's kind of their town hall, and that's where everything's taken care of. So they went to the city, and they spoke to the men of the city, and they gathered them all around, and they said, "These men are at peace with us. Therefore, let them dwell in the land and trade in it. For indeed the land is large enough for them. Let us take their daughters to us as wives, and let them give our daughters. Only on this condition will the men consent to dwell with us. Be one people. If every male among us is circumcised as they are circumcised, will not their livestock, their property, and every animal of theirs be ours? Only let us consent to them, and they'll dwell with us." And all who went out of the gate of his city heeded Hamor and Shechem his son. Every male was circumcised, and all who went out of the gate of his city. So evidently it was done right there. And they all agreed, sounds like a good deal to me. He must have been a good talker to get them to do all that, They thought they were going to really make a killing, huh? But not in that way. Now, it came to pass on the third day, when they were in pain, and I read just a little bit about this, and the third day is the most painful time after circumcision for an adult male. In fact, they usually have a fever with it, and they're just really incapacitated. So evidently, these young men knew that, and so they were using God's covenant picture for this, which was really a wrong thing to do. But that's what they were doing. And so it came to pass on the third day, when they were in pain, that two of the sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, and so we don't see Reuben involved in this. He was the oldest. You would think maybe he would be involved, but maybe he wasn't quite the hothead that they were. We're going to go to Genesis 49 in a minute, and Jacob is going to talk about these two boys. So these two young men each took his sword and came boldly upon the city and killed all the males. And they killed Hamor and Shechem his son on the edge of the sword, and took Dinah from Shechem's house and went out. And the sons of Jacob came upon the slain and plundered the city, because their sister had been defiled. Now the Jewish tradition has it that the two boys did the killing. They went from house to house. That would have been a lot of killing for two boys. But all the other brothers, the older brothers that were old enough to do this, went in and took everything. They, what's the word I'm looking for? Plundered is a good word, yeah. They plundered everything. They took everything they could, including the women and children for slaves. And so it was really a terrible thing. I don't know what God would have wanted them to do. Shechem did a terrible thing, and he probably should have paid for that, and I'm sure God would have wanted that. When the children of Israel went in to the promised land, 400 years later, God told them before they went in to go and to kill everyone, all of the pagans, because they were so evil. I just don't know. We don't know what God wanted. He's just telling us this story of what happened. So there are viewpoints on both sides, whether it was right or wrong in their eyes to do it. Some think it was, well, he had a right to kill Shechem and get their sister back, but not to kill everybody else. But when it said that they plundered the whole city, it seems to infer that they blamed all the people for this, for allowing it to happen, or whether maybe others were involved. We just don't know. But there's that viewpoint too, that they felt like the whole city was to blame. So that's really, all that I could gather from that circumstance. They took the the sheep, the oxen, the donkeys, what was in the city and what was in the field, and all of their wealth, all the little ones and their wives they took captive, and they plundered even all that was in the houses. And then in verse 30, Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, you have troubled me by making me obnoxious, or the old King James says, you're making me stink before everyone, among the inhabitants of the land, among the Canaanites and the Perizzites. And since I am few in number, they will gather themselves together against me and kill me. I shall be destroyed, my household and I. So here, who's Jacob thinking about? He's thinking about himself. He is including his family in that, but he's thinking he's going to lose everything. They have really tipped over the apple cart, and now he's not sure what he needs to do. But what did they say? Should he treat our sister like a harlot? And here they're saying our sister. They're not saying your daughter. Yeah. It's like, you don't even treat her like a daughter because you don't seem to care. So that is 34. We're left there with not really knowing how Jacob felt about his daughter. It's a little sad, isn't it, to see that. And we do not know what happened to Dinah. In that time period, a woman who's been defiled has no future. She might as well be dead. She will not be allowed to marry again. No one would want her. If she were to give birth to a child from this, we don't know what would happen there. We just have no clue as to what happened to Dinah. It's very, very sad. So let's go on to chapter 35. Now we see that Jacob is feeling like he's in a really bad situation with everybody around him. And so let's go ahead and read. Let me see where I'm going to start here. Let's go 1 through 3. And then God said to Jacob, so here God is speaking to Jacob, and if you can count, there are 7 times that we're told that God speaks to Jacob. And the number 7, of course, that's a very important number in Hebrew. He says to Jacob, arise and go to Bethel and dwell there, and make an altar there to God, who appeared to you when you fled from the face of Esau. And remember, he's still on his way down to see his father. So God's saying it's time to get out of this place, And Jacob said to his household and all that were with him, put away the foreign gods that are among you and purify yourselves and change your garments. This is showing here that he recognizes that it's time to clean up what's been going on. He's allowed the people that came with him, probably servants that had their idols and things, and it's time to get right with God. It's time to clean house, time to purify. The word, if I can find the word in Hebrew, for to purify or to be clean is to be bright. And it made me think of God. God is light. And so when you're bright, you're a light like God is. And pure. And so this is something that we can draw to ourselves, Is there a time right now that we need to clean up our own lives, get rid of anything? It's so easy to bring things into our lives, and they will be idols in our lives, even though we don't recognize that. Because anything that replaces God, anything that you value over God, anytime you spend more time on your hobby or whatever it is, even your children can become gods if you place them above the Lord. It's hard for us to think that because we love our family so much, but that's what God wants. He wants to be first in everything, and then everything else falls into place. And so this is a time they're purging all of this idolatry. He wants to get rid of all of it because he sees that the evilness has come into his family, and he wants to clean everything up and as much as he can. And so they brought all their idols, and I'm sure Rachel had her little teraphim that she had to get rid of too. And they brought, it says earrings in some of the Bible versions, but it was actually nose rings that says in Hebrew that they wore the nose rings. And so the women would bring their nose rings, and evidently they wore those in worship to certain gods and things. Not everybody did, but in particular, that's why they would have brought them. And so it says that he hid them under an oak tree, and it could very possibly be that same oak tree that we read about in other chapters, very famous oak tree. And what he did is he took them and he buried them in private, so nobody would see where he buried them, and got rid of them. So he did his house cleaning, and then they were ready to travel. And so let's go to see. I'll finish reading 4 if I haven't read it. So they gave Jacob all the foreign gods that were in their hands, and meaning the teraphim, and the earrings which were in their ears, and it's in Hebrew it said the nose rings which were in their broadness. I don't know if the nose was, that's what they meant by the broadness, but that's what it says in Hebrew. And Jacob hid them under the terebinth tree, which was the oak tree, which was in Shechem. And they journeyed, they started out on their journey, and the terror of God was upon the cities that were all around them, and they did not pursue the sons of Jacob. So God took care of that. Jacob had been so worried that they wouldn't make it, but God put this fear into all the pagans around them, and so they probably thought, well, maybe they'll come in and do the same thing to our city, And so whatever they thought, they were afraid. And so Jacob and his family were able to travel without any problem. And Jacob came to Luz, which is just outside of Bethel. He called it Bethel. And that was the land of Canaan. And he and all the people who were with him, and they built an altar there and called the place El Bethel, which is God, the house of God. So God's house of God, because there God appeared to him when he fled from the face of his brother. And then in verse 8 it says, now Deborah, Rebekah's nurse, died, and she was buried below Bethel under the terebinth tree. So the name of it was called Alon Bakuth. Now, we talked a little bit about Deborah before. She was Rachel's nurse, or Rebekah's nurse, and that would have been Jacob's mother. So she was a very old lady. And when I first read this, I thought, wow, somehow she probably came with Jacob. Somehow she connected with him. It's not real sure. I mean, there are different ideas about this that I've read about. And one thought is that Rebekah sent her with him at the very beginning, and it was just not told to us that she went with him. And then she was able to take care of his children as they were born and help with that. The other viewpoint is that Rebekah promised that she would send her to get him in a little while, She just wanted him to get out of the town, get out of the area so that Esau wouldn't kill him. And then she was going to send for him, and she was going to send Deborah for him. So that's another thought, that she went later and was with him. Then there's the other thought that he came upon this. She died years before and was buried there, and he came upon this place and saw where she'd been buried, and so he grieved for her, not really realizing she'd died, and was a place of weeping. That's what it was called, the place of weeping, or the tree of weeping. And that's very, very good possibility in my mind. The other thing is that he was also weeping for his mother, because he had found out that she was not alive any longer somehow, because Deborah was there. So all kinds of possibilities there. Then God appeared to Jacob again when he came from Padam Aram, and he blessed him. And God said to him, your name is Jacob. You shall not be called Jacob anymore, but Israel shall be your name. So he's reiterating. He's already told him that, but now he's saying it again. And so he called his name Israel. So you see here, he'd done what God wanted. He'd cleaned out everything. He was honoring God. He built an altar. He was doing all, everything that God asked him to do. He traveled, when God told him to leave, he traveled. So now his name is Israel. He's not calling him Jacob anymore. So we'll see how long that lasts. And God said to him, I am God Almighty, which is El Shaddai, God of abundance, the all God, the God of everything. Be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall proceed from you, and kings shall come from your body. And of course, we know there were no kings at the time. This is a promise for in the future that he is going to have a king, and of course, we know the King of Kings will come from him. The land which I gave Abraham and Isaac I give to you, and to your descendants after you I give this land. Then God went up from him in the place where he talked with him. God ascended. So what does that tell us? If he had to ascend, it sounds like it might be the angel of the Lord talking to him. Just my viewpoint there. So Jacob set up a pillar in the place where he talked to him, a pillar of stone, and he poured a drink offering on it, and he poured oil on it. And of course, the oil is the anointing. And Jacob called the name of the place where he spoke with God, Bethel. And then in 16, they journeyed from Bethel, but when they were but a little distance from to go to Ephrath, Rachel labored in childbirth, and she had hard labor. And now it came to pass, when she was in hard labor, that the midwife said to her, do not fear, you'll have a son, this son also. And so it was, as her soul was departing, for she died, that she called his name Ben-Oni, but his father called him Benjamin. So I'll stop there, and we're going to talk a little bit about Ben-Oni. Ben-Oni means son of my sorrow, son of my strength. There are several words that can be used there, and several different adaptations, but they all mean the same thing. She realized she was dying. She was in sorrow over it. She had little strength, and so she was going to call him son of my sorrow. But Jacob did not want his son to carry that moniker. He wanted an uplifting name, and so he changed the name to Benjamin. Now, Benjamin is translated son of my right hand. The actual word of my right hand is Yemen Ka, which is very close, very close. But the word Yamin means south. And it's one of those, I think it's a pun that is used in the Bible, because it's really both. It really can be both. And an ancient rabbi has written about it, and he used Psalm 89, and I think it's 12. Psalm 89, verses 12 to 14 to support this. And I'm going to go ahead and read it. You can look it up if you want. Psalm 89, 12 to 14. The verse goes this way: Heaven is yours, the earth too, the world and all it holds. You establish them north, south, and remember, south is Yamin. You created them, Tabor and Hermon, which are the mountains. Sing forth your name. And here it says, yours is an arm endowed with might. Your hand is strong. Your right hand, which is Yemen Ka, is exalted. So here we see both of those used in that verse. Now, the reason south is important in this is because he was headed south to his father's house. So it all kind of ties together. He was going south, and he wanted an uplifting name also, son of my right hand, because he was looking forward to the future. And he didn't like to dwell in the past, which is a good thing. A good thing for us to remember too. Okay, let me see. So verse 19, so Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrath, which is Bethlehem. And remember one of the verses in the Bible, there's a prophecy that Messiah would be born in Bethlehem Ephrath. There were 2 Bethlehems. There was another Bethlehem, I think, up to the north, and then Bethlehem Ephrath is where a Messiah was born, where Jesus was born. And so this is where Rachel died. And they actually had a tomb was built, and this was built later to honor her. And here's this little picture. I don't know if you can see it very well. Until maybe 20 years ago, you could go by there, and you could see it. And then about maybe 15 years ago or so, they built a big wall around it, so it's, you can't see it as well. You can go in and you can be in there and everything, but it's not like just passing it by like this. But for centuries, people were able to see that and honor it. And of course, Jews, Christians, Muslims all honor Rachel. So we know that she was buried just outside of Bethlehem. And here is just a really interesting thing to think about. So I'm going to just go into a little bit of detail. Let me go ahead and read some of this. Jacob set a pillar to on her grave, which is a pillar of Rachel's grave to this day, and at the time of the writing, it was still there. Then Israel journeyed and pitched his tent beyond the tower of Eder. And it happened when Israel dwelt in that land that Reuben went out and he lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel heard about it. We're gonna forget that for a minute. I want to focus. I should have just stopped at 22. I want to focus on the Tower of Eder. Tower of Eder is a watchtower, and in Hebrew it's called Migdal. Sometimes we'll run across that word Migdal. And it was used for shepherds to watch their flocks. That's what a tower was for. And I showed you earlier, just kind of build up. They're not real tall. Usually like maybe another story. They could walk up some stairs up in there and maybe sleep or something. I don't know what they used it for. But down below was like a manger. And that was where they took care of the ewes that were about to give birth. And this was especially important for the priestly shepherds who raised the sacrificial lambs for the temple. Now, at this time period, there was no temple. There were no sacrificial lambs being raised or anything, but it was being used for lambs. And if we remember, it was Boaz lived in this very same area. He owned these fields, very same fields. God repeats everything, so it's like emphasis, like, are you getting it now, like by rote, He's doing that with us to get into our heads, what happened there, what's important there. So Boaz and Ruth lived in the same area later on. They had sheep there. They were great-grandparents of King David, and that's where he watched his sheep. That's where he wrote most of the Psalms, right in the same spot. So all of these things are happening right in the same area. Israel is very small, really, when you think about it, And so it's so easy to have these things overlap each other. But not living there, we don't understand that. But it's very important. God did this on purpose because he wants us to understand these things. So in this very same area where there was a there was a tower there, just like we were talking about. They kept a tower there because they always raised sheep, and that was their way. They would probably go up in the top and kind of watch out for wolves and things like that too. I kind of forgot about that, but I think that's probably one of the reasons it was up high, because it was a tower, and they was used for that. So he pitched his tent just beyond there, and so they're right there where all the events are going to be happening in the future that are so exciting. Another thing about the Tower of Eder is that it is believed that that is where Jesus was born. He was born in one of those towers. He was born where they took care of the sacrificial lambs for the temple, because he was the sacrificial lamb. And when I think about that, it just is just amazing to think how God brings everything together like that, They would use the priestly clothes that the priests wore out they would give them to the shepherds for the sacrificial lambs to be used to wipe them down after they were born and to clean them up. And so they were called swaddling clothes. And so when we read about Jesus being wrapped in swaddling clothes, it just makes sense that he was wrapped in priestly clothing, which he should be. Of all the sacrificial lambs, he's the one that needs to be wrapped in those priestly clothing because he's our high priest. So, and of course, they were there to inspect when they brought them down into that bottom part of that tower. They were to inspect the lambs to make sure that they didn't have any spot or any wrinkle. And so that, goes right along with Jesus. He had no sin. He had no spot. So it's a perfect time for him to be looked over by the priestly shepherds and to have them go and announce. So it's a beautiful picture, really is. There's some more scripture that kind of points to that. Let me see if I can find where I am here. I've got another picture here. Here's another artist drawing of a tower to show that. You can kind of see that a little bit. Yeah, it does. It's kind of that type of thing, yeah. And of course, made out of stone, they would last a long time. Go to Jeremiah 31:15, because there's another prophecy here concerning this. Jeremiah 31. For Ezekiel. And 15. And it says, "Thus says the Lord, a voice was heard from Ramah," and Ramah is the area we're talking about. It is another name for that area, Ramah. Lamentation and bitter weeping. Rachel weeping for her children, refusing to be comforted for her children because they are no more. And of course, they're drawing on the fact that Rachel died there, and of course she wept for her children. But there's a bigger meaning there. So often there's a double meaning, in the Bible. And there's one for then, and there's one as a prophecy. And this was a prophecy for when King Herod came into the area, and he killed all the baby boys, hoping to kill anyone who might take his kingship away from him, And he slaughtered in that area because he was told that the prophecy was that the baby was to be born there. And so, of course, Mary and Joseph were warned, and they headed for Egypt before that happened. But this is referring to that time, and you can imagine, we don't know how many babies were killed at that time. I've heard all different numbers, from hundreds to, we just don't know. But a lot of baby boys died, and of course, much weeping. So that goes along with it. See if there's anything else here. Micah 4:8-10 is another prophetic verse. Yeah, Micah is it's right after Jonah. And then 4. Pardon?
Last book of the Old Testament.
Old Testament.
Right, last book.
No, that's Malachi. You got me. Okay, and now I lost my place here. 8-10. Chapter 4, 8-10. And chapter 4, 8 to 10, and it says, "O you, O tower of the flock." And here it's referring to the watchtower that we were just talking about, where we think Jesus was born. And so this is prophecy, and it says, "O you, tower of the flock, the stronghold of the daughter of Zion, to you it shall come," and that's referring to Messiah, "even the former dominion shall come, the kingdom of the daughter of Jerusalem. Now why do you cry aloud? Is there no king in your midst? Has your counselor perished? What pangs have seized you like a woman in labor? Be in pain and labor and bring forth, O daughter of Zion, like a woman in birth pangs. For now you shall go forth from the city, and you shall dwell in the field. And to Babylon you shall go, and there you shall be delivered. There the Lord will redeem you from the hand of your enemies." So it's talking there about the tower of the flock, and it's a prediction, not a prediction, but a prophecy that Messiah, and that's how they interpret it, that Messiah would be born in that area. So
So the stable was the tower?
that's what many people believe, that would have been the perfect area for him to be born. Would have been protected, would have been clean, and the shepherds would know exactly where to go. You know, it doesn't say, it just says go. He's been born, and so they would just automatically go there. So anyway, it's a beautiful picture, isn't it, of Christmas that we don't think about. Okay, let's continue here. The last one I had read already, a shocking thing, and it happened when Israel dwelled in that land. And of course, here he's still referred to as Israel, not Jacob. That Reuben went in and he lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel heard about it. That's all we know. He heard about it. It doesn't say he confronted him. It doesn't say anything. To me, I see Jacob as very non-confrontive. When they stole these wells, he just went on somewhere else. He didn't want any confrontation with anyone all through his life. We just don't see that. He's a very peaceful man, but you know, that was just part of his personality. He didn't like to confront people. He did have some big confrontations that God put in his life, but he tried to avoid them if he could, it seems like. And so yeah, I think Isaac was kind of a mild-mannered person too. I don't think they were like Abraham. Abraham was a really strong personality, and he stood up against things, you know. I could see that, but it's just kind of something to think about. Different personalities, but God's still blessing him. God's using him, you know, and it's good to be peaceable. There's nothing wrong with that, but sometimes you have to stand for what's right, and you have to take care of business. We just don't know anything about that. Now, the whole idea of this, first of all, Bilhah was a concubine for Rachel. And the Jewish tradition is that when Rachel died, the baby was given to Bilhah to raise, Benjamin. So, and of course, Joseph was older. He was a teenager at the time. He was pretty grown, probably next to Dad all the time. I can see him with Dad all the time, you know. And so, but this isn't very long before his brothers sell him. You know, it's just getting real close to that time period, so we can see that. So, so Bilhah was Rachel's concubine, and Reuben was the first son born to Leah. Now, why he did this, nobody knows. Maybe he was attracted to her and they just, you know, wanted to do it on quiet, and he didn't think anybody would find out. In the Near East, especially in ancient times, it was a cultural thing for the oldest son, or maybe one of the sons, not necessarily the oldest, to take their father's wife, especially if she was not his mother personally, you know, another wife, and sleep with her, because he would be claiming the inheritance. He'd be claiming to follow the dad. It was seen as he was kind of strutting his stuff, I guess. I don't know. He was just making his manhood known to everybody that he could be the one. He could be the leader by doing this, taking over his dad. To me, it's kind of like father and son wrestling to see if the kid can finally overcome his dad. You know how that is. Sometimes it takes a while for the kid to be old enough to be able to do that. Anyway, that was a custom in some of the pagan cultures. So we don't know exactly why he did it. It's just the fact that he did do this, and Jacob never got over it. He kept that in his heart. He may not have ever spoken to him about it, but he kept it in his heart. We just don't know. So I'm going to go on with 23. Now the sons of Jacob were 12. He had 12 sons now. And the sons of Leah, and here we're going to get them all named and who the mothers were and everything. The sons of Leah were Reuben, Jacob's firstborn, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. And the sons of Rachel were Joseph and Benjamin. And then the sons of Bilhah, Rachel's maidservant, were Dan and Naphtali. And the sons of Zilpah, Leah's maidservant, were Gad and Asher. And these were the sons of Jacob who were born to him in Padan Aram. So now he's got his quiver full, and but he's got his favorites for sure. Then Jacob came to his father Isaac at Mamre in Kiriath Arba, which is Hebron, where Abraham and Isaac had dwelt. And remember, Mamre is where the tombs are for all the patriarchs. That's where Abraham and Sarah were buried, and where we know that Isaac and Rebekah were buried there, and Jacob is buried there now, and Leah. Everybody wonders why Rachel wasn't buried there. Well, she died early on, and on the way there, I don't know why he didn't take her there, but he didn't. Maybe he was honoring Leah. She was unloved, and his first wife. So maybe he felt that she was due there, but that was the situation. And so he's got his 12 boys. He came to Isaac, and now it says the days of Isaac were 180 years. He's 180 years old. And so Isaac breathed his last, and he died and was gathered to his people. And of course, when it says gathered to his people, he's going to Sheol to be with all those who have died before him, being old and full of days. And his sons Esau and Jacob buried him. And so it's nice to see that they came together and buried their father together in peace, obviously. But I got to thinking about this, and I did a little arithmetic, and I've never run across anybody else saying this, not that it's not out there, and I hope it's right, but my arithmetic tells me that Jacob and Esau were 120 at this time, because Isaac was 60 years old when they were born. He's 180 now. They would be 120. Okay. Jacob was 91 when Joseph was born. Backing it up a little bit. So that's almost 29 years before this. Well, we know, and we're going to find out in the next chapter or two, next two chapters, I guess, that Joseph was kidnapped and went to Egypt when he was 17. So if Joseph is 29 when Isaac died, he would have been in Egypt for almost, quite a few years. So I never thought about that before. So here, all this time, Jacob has been grieving for his son. Joseph's not with him at this time. Just never, I always think, well, everything's kind of linear, but it's not. Things are just thrown in a little bit out of place, it happened, this happened, and you have to kind of backtrack a little bit and see what's really going on, because we missed something there. And so here, all these years, he wasn't able to get over the grief, of losing Joseph. It was bad enough to lose Rachel, but when he lost Joseph, that was really heartbreaking to him. So you can see why he clung to Benjamin. Even when he was an adult, he didn't want to let him go. So I just thought that was kind of interesting to think about time-wise here, because I'd never run across that before. So that is it for chapter 35. And next week we're going to look at Esau's family, and then I think we're going to, I think we'll just do one chapter next week, because this is kind of the break. We've had, Genesis in the beginning, we learned about creation and everything that happened with the flood and all, and then it went into Abraham's family. We're getting towards the very end now. We're going to see, we'll still see Jacob, but he's not the important character anymore. It's going to be focusing on, in 37, it's going to be focusing now on Joseph and Joseph's life for the rest of Genesis, and so that'll take in all of that. So it is kind of a good breaking point. So if you want to read 36, and we'll take care of that, and then the following week we'll get started on Joseph. Anybody have any questions or comments on anything?
Well, when we get to heaven, we're going to meet all these people.
Isn't that going to be, we can sit and talk and say, well, why did that happen, and then they can tell me where I was wrong on all these things. Oh boy, did you get that wrong. So it's, yeah, nice try. We work with what we have, huh? So anyway, I think it's interesting to me, the family dynamics of this, because nothing is new. We see same things happening maybe in a different circumstance in other families. We can relate it to our own families at times, and God still uses people no matter what, and he still works in their lives and still brings good things into their lives. And if we just keep ourselves clean and we follow him and obey him, why, we have nothing to worry about. He's going to take care of everything for us and give us even more blessings than we can imagine. So.
But it sure is a day-to-day thing. I mean, it's not just a one-time
No.
thing. Every day we have to.
It is. And we see that in the Bible too. We see Jacob, he has to go to God every day. He has to, continually. It's no different for them, no different for us. It's a day-by-day thing, and we can just get really down. We just have to lift ourselves up through God, give it to him, and start fresh, and just keep in mind all of his blessings, because it's so easy when you're not feeling well, for one thing, it's so easy to get depressed and just want to give up on everything, It's, with me, that's one of the hardest things, is if I'm not feeling well, I just throw in the towel,
Find a psalm.
Yes,
Read a psalm.
absolutely, and be lifted up.
Yeah.
Psalms are wonderful. They brought me through a lot. Beautiful, beautiful psalms. And of course, we know David had the same problems. He was a very emotional man, and very talented. He had, musician and writing the psalms, and God used him mightily, but yet he had his faults for sure, So we're encouraged by that. And everybody in here has got faults. There are two people in here that God never mentions anything bad about them, anything that they did wrong. And one is who was I going to say now? Well, one was Joseph, because he just had a good life, The only thing people pick at him about is his dreams, and but he had those dreams and he was telling them, and maybe innocently. I don't believe he was doing it to rub it in their noses, and saying you're gonna bow down to me. He was just telling them that happened. I don't find any fault in him with that. The other person was Daniel that I was thinking of, and there's nothing bad about Daniel in here. He was just a godly man, and I'm sure he had his faults, but they're not mentioned here. God just lifts him up as a person that we can.
Really honored God, Daniel.
Yes.
3 times a
Yes.
day he would pray for
Absolutely,
Jerusalem,
yes.
and he never defiled himself.
Absolutely. Well, if no one has another comment or question, we'll go ahead to prayer and just ask the Lord to take care of us this week, Lord, to help us to share the gospel with any that we meet, to be lifted up by your words, Lord, and just carry us through. And we thank you again for all you do for us. In Jesus' name, amen.